The fluorescent lights of the Edwards Air Force Base Auditorium cast a sterile glow over the assembled crowd of young pilots. Their fresh faces and crisp uniforms contrasted sharply with the weathered appearance of the man who stood before them. Retired Colonel Frank Harrison, age 65, commanded the room with the quiet authority that came only from decades of service. His silver hair was cropped in a military cut that hadn't changed since the Cold War, and the lines etched into his face told stories of battles fought both in the air and within the chain of command. Before I begin today's lecture, Harrison said, his voice carrying to the back of the room without effort, I want to tell you about a day in 2005 that changed everything we thought we knew about close air support. He paused, surveying the audience. It was the day 381 Navy SEALs and support personnel were trapped in the Korangal Valley of Afghanistan. The room fell silent. Even the usual shuffling of feet and rustling of papers ceased as Harrison continued. Command had already written them off as casualties. The terrain was too dangerous, the enemy too entrenched, and conventional rescue operations were deemed impossible. His voice dropped lower, drawing the audience in. That was the day I watched someone do what everyone said couldn't be done. A young lieutenant in the front row leaned forward. Sir, is this the Thunderbolt 7 mission? I thought that was classified. Harrison smiled slightly. It was declassified last month, which is why I'm here today. Because what happened in that valley wasn't just about saving lives. It was about challenging everything we thought we knew about what an A-10 could do, what a pilot could do. He looked out across the room, his gaze settling on nothing in particular as his mind traveled back 17 years. And it all began with a pilot who refused to accept that 381 American heroes were going to die that day. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac of Edwards Air Force Base as Captain Megan Riley completed her third pre-flight inspection of the day. At 0630 hours, on what promised to be another scorching California morning, she stood beside her A-10 Thunderbolt II, running her hands along the aircraft's titanium armor plating with the practiced touch of someone who understood that attention to detail meant the difference between life and death. Megan was 26 years old, though her youthful face and slight build made her appear younger. Born to an Irish-American family with 3 generations of military service, she carried herself with the quiet intensity that marked those who had something to prove. Her auburn hair was always pulled back in a regulation bun, but a few rebellious strands inevitably escaped to frame her green eyes. Eyes that missed nothing and forgot even less. Standing barely 5'4" and weighing 125 pounds, Megan looked almost comically small next to the massive A-10 Warthog. The aircraft was a flying tank designed for one purpose: close air support. Its 30mm GAU-8 Avenger cannon could tear through enemy armor like paper, firing 3 900 rounds per minute, with a distinctive sound that had earned it the nickname, the Bird of Death, among ground troops. Its ability to absorb punishment was legendary among pilots who had flown combat missions since the Gulf War. But for all its fearsome reputation, the A-10 required a pilot with surgical precision and nerves of steel to be truly effective. Megan possessed both qualities in abundance, though her squadron mates seemed to notice only her perceived weaknesses. "Riley, you're not flying today," came the familiar voice of Major Marcus Reynolds as he approached her aircraft. Reynolds was everything Megan wasn't. Tall, broad-shouldered, and possessed of the easy confidence that came from never having to prove his worth. At 45, his salt and pepper hair and the creases around his eyes spoke of the countless hours he had spent in combat during Desert Storm and the early years of the War on Terror. He had been flying A-10s for 15 years and commanded the 75th Fighter Squadron with the kind of casual authority that brooked no argument. "Sir, my bird is ready and I'm on the rotation schedule," Megan replied, not looking up from her inspection checklist. She had learned to keep her voice level during these conversations, though inside she felt the familiar burn of frustration. "Change of plans. We've got a formation flight with the new pilots from the 23rd. I need experienced hands in the air, not someone who might overthink under pressure." Reynolds' tone was matter-of-fact, as if he was discussing the weather, rather than grounding one of his pilots based on assumptions he'd never tested. Megan finally looked up, her green eyes flashing with barely controlled anger. "Major, I've logged more simulator hours than half the pilots you're putting up today. My targeting accuracy is in the top 5% of the squadron, and I've never missed a qualification metric since I arrived. That's not the point, Riley. The 23rd pilots need to see how real Air Force pilots handle formation flying. They need steady leadership, not someone who will analyze a situation to death while the enemy is shooting at them. Reynolds turned to leave, then paused. Besides, we need someone to coordinate the ground maintenance schedule. Your attention to detail makes you perfect for logistics support. There it was again, logistics support. The same dead-end assignment that had claimed so many promising military careers. Megan watched Reynolds walk away, his dismissal hanging in the air like exhaust fumes. Around her, other pilots were beginning their own pre-flight routines, getting ready for the kind of mission she had trained for but was never quite deemed ready to handle. What Reynolds and the others didn't know was that Megan had been preparing for something much bigger than formation flights with rookie pilots. For the past 8 months, she'd been studying close air support tactics with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She'd memorized the specifications of every enemy weapon system in the Afghan theater, could identify friendly forces by their movement patterns alone, and had even learned basic Pashto to better communicate with local allies if necessary. Her fellow pilots saw her dedication as evidence of insecurity proof that she was trying too hard to compensate for her obvious limitations. They couldn't understand that she was preparing for the moment when someone's life would depend on her skills, her knowledge, and her absolute refusal to accept that any mission was impossible. As she watched the selected pilots taxi toward the runway, Megan made her way toward the operations center to accept her logistics assignment. But first she stopped by the intelligence section to review the morning briefings. She might not be flying today, but she could still prepare for tomorrow. After all, in her experience, tomorrow had a way of arriving when you least expected it. The operations briefing room buzzed with the controlled chaos of a military unit preparing for combat operations. Megan sat in the back row, her notebook open, as she dutifully recorded equipment assignments and maintenance schedules. Around her, the real pilots, as Major Reynolds had made clear, discussed flight plans, target priorities, and the kind of complex tactical decisions that she was apparently too analytical to handle. Captain Jake Cooper Reynolds, second in command, stood at the front of the room, updating the squadron on recent intelligence reports. His voice carried the easy authority of someone who'd never been questioned about his fitness for command. Enemy activity has increased significantly in the Korangal Valley over the past week. We're seeing coordinated movements that suggest a major operation is in planning stages. Megan's pen stopped moving. She'd been tracking the same intelligence patterns and had reached a different conclusion. The enemy wasn't planning an operation. They were already executing one. The movement pattern suggested a systematic effort to cut off and isolate forward operating bases, creating kill zones where conventional rescue operations would be impossible. She raised her hand. Captain Cooper, has anyone considered that these movements might indicate a trap rather than preparation? The pattern suggests they're trying to lure our forces into prepared ambush positions. The room fell silent. Cooper's expression shifted from professional attention to barely concealed irritation. Riley, you're here to track equipment, not to analyze intelligence. Leave the tactical assessments to the people actually flying the missions. Heat rose in Megan's cheeks. With respect, sir, I've been studying these patterns for weeks. The enemy is using our own response protocols against us. They know we'll send rescue forces if they isolate our people, and they're preparing to ambush those rescue forces using the terrain to their advantage. That's enough, Major Reynolds interrupted from the front of the room. Riley, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but operational planning requires experience that you simply don't have. Focus on your assigned duties. The dismissal hit like a physical blow. Around her, other pilots exchanged glances that ranged from sympathetic to amused. She caught Captain Lisa Martinez, one of the few other women in the squadron, looking at her with something that might have been pity. Martinez had survived in this environment by never challenging the established order, by accepting her role and never pushing for more. After the briefing, Megan found herself walking alongside Martinez toward the maintenance hangar. You know they're not going to listen to you, right? Martinez said quietly. I learned a long time ago that the best way to survive here is to do your job and not make waves. But what if I'm right? What if there are people out there who are going to die because we're too stubborn to consider intelligence from someone who isn't part of the boys' club? Martinez stopped walking and turned to face her. Then they die and you move on. That's the job, Megan. We're not here to save the world. We're here to follow orders and support the mission as defined by people who outrank us. I can't accept that. I became a pilot to make a difference, not to count spare parts, while other people make the decisions that matter. Then you're going to have a very frustrating career, Martinez said, not unkindly. Look, I get it. When I first got here, I thought I could change things too. But the system is what it is. You can fight it and destroy yourself, or you can work within it and maybe eventually earn enough respect to have your voice heard. Megan wanted to argue, but she could see the exhaustion in Martinez's eyes. This was a woman who had fought the same battles and had chosen survival over principle. It was a rational choice, perhaps even the smart choice, but it wasn't one that Megan could make. That afternoon, while conducting her assigned inventory duties, Megan overheard a conversation between two maintenance chiefs that made her blood run cold. Word from command is that Special Operations has teams operating in some pretty hairy areas. If any of those boys get into trouble, we might not be able to get them out. What do you mean? Asked his companion. The terrain, the enemy positioning, it's all wrong for conventional rescue operations. Command is basically acknowledging that some of our people might be on their own if things go sideways. Megan felt her stomach clench. This was exactly what she tried to warn about in the briefing. The enemy was creating situations where American forces would be isolated and vulnerable, counting on the fact that traditional rescue doctrine would be inadequate to the challenge. She thought about saying something about taking her concerns up the chain of command, but she already knew what would happen. She'd be told to stay in her lane, to focus on her assigned duties, to leave the serious thinking to the people who were qualified to do it. Instead, she returned to her quarters that evening and pulled out the tactical studies she'd been working on in her spare time. If command wouldn't listen to her warnings, she could at least prepare for the moment when those warnings proved prophetic, because in her gut, she knew that moment was coming. While the rest of the squadron slept, Megan was wide awake in the flight simulator at 300 hours. The facility was officially closed, but she'd learned to bypass the security protocols weeks ago. The darkened simulator bay hummed with the quiet efficiency of machines that never needed rest, much like the woman who operated them in the pre-dawn hours when no one was watching. Tonight's scenario was her own creation, a close air support mission in mountainous terrain, with multiple friendly units pinned down by superior enemy forces. She'd programmed in weather conditions that would challenge even the most experienced pilots. Low visibility crosswinds and the kind of terrain that turned routine sorties into nightmares. The virtual cockpit of her A-10 felt as real as the aircraft sitting on the tarmac outside. Every switch and gauge positioned exactly where muscle memory expected to find them. Falcon Base, this is Thunderbolt 7 requesting immediate close air support, came a voice through her headset. She'd recorded the calls herself using voice modulation software to create realistic radio chatter from fictional ground units. We have 300-plus friendly personnel surrounded in Grid Square Tango 74. Enemy positions are danger close. We need precision strikes or we're not making it out. Megan's hands moved across the controls with practiced precision. She'd run variations of this scenario 47 times over the past 3 months, each iteration designed to push her skills beyond what any training manual required. Her targeting solutions had to be perfect. The margin for error when friendlies were danger close was measured in meters, not kilometers. The simulator's threat warning system screamed as surface-to-air missiles locked onto her aircraft. Standard doctrine called for immediate evasive maneuvers, but Megan had developed her own approach. Instead of breaking off the attack run, she used the A-10's superior maneuverability at low speeds to thread between the missile threats while maintaining target acquisition. It was dangerous, arguably reckless, but it kept her weapons trained on the enemy positions that were threatening the surrounded friendlies. Her first pass eliminated the primary anti-aircraft positions. Her second run targeted the enemy command post using the A-10's GAU-8 cannon with surgical precision. By the third pass, she'd created an escape corridor wide enough for the surrounded forces to break out of the encirclement. "Thunderbolt 7, this is Falcon Base," came her own voice through the speakers, shifted to sound like a grateful ground commander. "That was the finest display of close air support I've ever witnessed. You just saved 300 lives." Megan powered down the simulator and sat in the darkness for a moment, her heart still racing from the adrenaline of the virtual mission. 300 lives. The number wasn't arbitrary. It represented the approximate strength of a special operations task force, the kind of unit that operated in the most dangerous areas of Afghanistan with minimal support and maximum risk. She'd been studying special operations deployment patterns for months, using her security clearance to access mission reports and after-action reviews. What she'd discovered troubled her deeply. Special ops teams were being deployed into increasingly isolated positions, often without adequate air support coverage. The official explanation was that these units were highly trained and capable of operating independently. But Megan saw a different pattern emerging. The enemy was learning to exploit gaps in American air support doctrine. They were positioning themselves in terrain that made traditional close air support difficult or impossible, then systematically isolating American forces in areas where help couldn't reach them. It was a strategy that relied on American commanders following their own rules, even when those rules led to disaster. Megan pulled out a detailed map of Afghanistan that she'd been marking with colored pins for weeks. Red pins marked enemy activity. Blue pins showed American bases and deployment areas. Yellow pins indicated areas where terrain made air support challenging. The pattern that emerged was chilling. The enemy was systematically creating kill zones where American forces could be trapped and eliminated without effective air support. She had tried to present this analysis to her superiors, but her warnings had been dismissed as the overactive imagination of someone desperate to prove herself. Major Reynolds had actually laughed when she'd suggested that the enemy was sophisticated enough to develop counter-air strategies. "Riley," he said, "you're giving these people way too much credit. They're not tactical geniuses. They're just terrorists with rifles." But Megan knew better. She'd studied the enemy's tactics in detail, had analyzed their movement patterns and engagement strategies. These weren't random attacks by undisciplined insurgents. They were coordinated operations by an enemy that had learned to turn American strengths against them. "You're still at it, I see." The voice startled Megan. She hadn't heard anyone enter the simulator bay. She turned to find Colonel Frank Harrison standing in the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest, a knowing smile on his face. At 48, Harrison was a legend in A-10 circles. He'd flown combat missions in both Gulf Wars before an injury had grounded him. Now he served as the head of technical operations, overseeing the maintenance and modification of the base's aircraft fleet. While he no longer flew combat missions, his expertise was unquestioned. "Colonel Harrison." Megan began scrambling to explain her unauthorized use of the simulator. Harrison waved off her explanation. "At ease, Captain. I've known about your night training sessions for weeks. Security Protocol Charlie 7 was updated 3 months ago. You're still using the old bypass." Megan felt her face flush. "Sir, I can explain." "No need." Harrison stepped into the simulator bay, glancing at the screen still displaying her mission stats. "Perfect targeting solutions on all runs, minimal collateral damage, and you managed to evade 3 SAM sites while maintaining your attack vector." He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "That's not standard procedure." "No, sir, it's not. It's better." Harrison's voice softened. "I knew your father, Captain Riley. James was the finest A-10 pilot I ever flew with." Megan felt her throat tighten at the mention of her father. Lieutenant Colonel James Riley had been a legend in the close air support community before his death in Iraq in 1991. He had died attempting a rescue mission deemed too dangerous by command, flying into a heavily defended area to provide support for surrounded American forces. The official report cited pilot error and deviation from standard operating procedures as the causes of his death. "He used to say that standard procedures were written in blood," Harrison continued, "but sometimes the procedures themselves cause the bloodshed." He nodded toward the simulator. "What you're developing here, these modified attack patterns for extreme close air support, your father was working on something similar before he died." "I didn't know that, sir." Harrison's eyes took on a distant look. "Project Thunderbolt. That was the unofficial name. A Cold War-era program to develop ultra-close air support techniques for potential Soviet tank columns breaking through the Fulda Gap. James revived some of the concepts during Desert Storm when he realized that conventional minimum safe distances weren't going to cut it in urban environments." "What happened to the project?" Megan asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "It died with him. Command decided his techniques were too risky, required too much individual pilot skill to be standardized. They buried the research, classified it, and went back to the old doctrine." Harrison's gaze sharpened. The same doctrine that's getting our people killed in those Afghan mountains right now. Megan felt a chill run down her spine. You've seen the pattern, too. Harrison nodded. I'm not blind, Captain. The Taliban are creating kill zones where our air support can't operate effectively using standard procedures, and our command structure is too rigid to adapt. I tried to warn them in the briefing today. I heard Reynolds shut you down pretty fast. Harrison sighed. He's not a bad officer, you know. He just believes in the system because the system has never failed him personally. The system is failing those special forces teams, Megan said firmly. I know, which is why I'm going to help you. Harrison stepped closer to the simulator. Your father was onto something with his modified attack patterns, but he was still figuring it out when he died. You've taken it further already, but there are elements you're missing. What kind of elements? Harrison smiled, a hint of the maverick pilot he'd once been showing through his professional exterior. Let's just say that the official specifications for the GAU-8 cannon's precision at minimum safe distance are conservative. And the A-10's maneuverability envelope in the official flight manual doesn't tell the whole story. Megan felt a surge of hope. You're going to help me train. Better than that, I'm going to help you access the original Project Thunderbolt files. They're still classified, but I have ways. Harrison's expression turned serious. Because I think you're right about what's coming, Captain. And when it does, someone needs to be ready to do what the rulebook says can't be done. The morning briefing on September 15th should have been routine. Intelligence reports indicated moderate enemy activity in the southern provinces, and the day's flight schedule included standard reconnaissance and patrol missions. Megan sat in her usual spot in the back of the briefing room, expecting another day of equipment inventory and maintenance coordination. What she didn't expect was to watch her squadron prepare for the kind of mission she'd been training for in secret. Major Reynolds stood at the front of the room, his expression more serious than usual as he addressed the assembled pilots. Gentlemen, he glanced toward Megan and Captain Martinez, and ladies, we've received a priority tasking from Special Operations Command. Operation Granite Shield is a coordinated search and destroy mission targeting high-value enemy assets in the Korengal Valley. The room buzzed with excitement. This was the kind of mission that pilots joined the Air Force to fly. Direct action in support of special operations forces with the kind of tactical complexity that separated elite units from routine military formations. Megan felt her pulse quicken as Reynolds continued the briefing. The mission profile calls for precision strikes against fortified positions in mountainous terrain. Enemy forces are well equipped with surface-to-air missiles and have established overlapping fields of fire that will make this extremely challenging. I need my most experienced pilots for this operation. Captain Cooper stepped forward to outline the tactical situation. Intelligence indicates approximately 200 enemy fighters have established defensive positions along 3 ridgelines. Our job is to neutralize these positions in support of a SEAL team insertion that will commence immediately after our strikes. Megan's mind raced as she processed the mission parameters. This was exactly the scenario she'd been preparing for. Mountainous terrain precision targeting requirements and the kind of close coordination with special operations forces that demanded split-second timing and surgical accuracy. Her hand started to rise, ready to volunteer her expertise, but Reynolds' next words stopped her cold. Cooper, your flight lead. Take Walker Henderson and Kowalski with you. 4 birds should be sufficient for the target set. He turned to address the rest of the squadron. The rest of you will maintain standard patrol rotations. Riley, I need you to coordinate with maintenance to ensure our birds are properly configured for the mission loadout. The dismissal was casual, almost offhand, but it hit Megan like a physical blow. She was being assigned to equipment coordination, while her squadron flew the most important mission they'd seen in months. Around her, the selected pilots were already discussing tactics and contingencies for a mission that perfectly matched her months of preparation, a mission she could contribute to significantly if given the chance. Instead, she would spend the day ensuring that their aircraft were properly loaded with weapons while they flew into combat without her. Sir, Megan said, raising her voice enough to cut through the tactical discussions. I'd like to volunteer for the mission. My training scores in mountainous terrain operations are... Riley, we've discussed this, Reynolds interrupted his tone, carrying the kind of patient exasperation reserved for children who refuse to understand simple concepts. This mission requires pilots with extensive combat experience. You're not ready for this level of complexity. With respect, sir, I've logged over 300 hours in simulator training specifically for this terrain profile. My accuracy ratings and precision targeting exceed squadron standards by 15%. There's a significant difference between shooting at stationary targets on a simulated range and engaging enemy forces that are shooting back, Reynolds replied. This mission is too important to risk on someone who's never been tested under real combat pressure. The words stung because they contained just enough truth to be devastating. Megan had indeed never been in a sustained firefight, had never had to maintain target acquisition while enemy missiles were tracking her aircraft. But she'd also never been given the chance to prove herself in those situations because her superiors had decided she wasn't ready for them. Captain Martinez leaned over from her seat nearby. Megan, sometimes it's better to wait for the right opportunity than to push for something you're not ready for. Let them handle this mission, and maybe next time. Next time what? Next time they'll suddenly decide I'm experienced enough. How do I get experience if I'm never allowed to participate in the missions that provide it? Martinez looked uncomfortable. That's just how the system works. You have to prove yourself, gradually build trust over time. But Megan had been proving herself gradually for 18 months without seeing any change in how she was perceived by her commanding officers. She watched Cooper's flight plan take shape on the tactical display, a complex multi-axis attack that would require precise timing and coordination. She could see flaws in their approach, inefficiencies that could be corrected with better understanding of the terrain features she'd studied obsessively. Sir, she tried once more. I've analyzed the target area extensively. The terrain features in Grid Square, Lima 7 present opportunities for... Riley, that's enough. Reynolds' voice carried the sharp edge of command authority. Your job is equipment coordination, not tactical planning. Focus on your assigned duties and let the experienced pilots handle the mission planning. The briefing continued around her, but Megan had stopped listening. She watched her squadron mates discuss strategies and contingencies for a mission that perfectly matched her months of preparation. A mission she could contribute to significantly if given the chance. Instead, she would spend the day ensuring that their aircraft were properly loaded with weapons while they flew into combat without her. As the briefing concluded and pilots headed toward their aircraft, Megan remained seated, staring at the tactical display that showed the mountain terrain she knew better than anyone in the room. Today, her knowledge would remain unused, her skills untested, her preparation irrelevant. But as she watched the mission brief fade from the screen, she made a silent promise to herself the next time American lives hung in the balance. She would be ready to act regardless of whether her superiors deemed her worthy of the opportunity. Megan found Colonel Harrison in his office later that afternoon. The older officer was reviewing maintenance logs when she entered, but he set them aside when he saw her expression. They're sending a SEAL team into the Karangal Valley, she said without preamble. Right into the kill zone I identified. Harrison nodded slowly. I saw the mission brief. Cooper's leading the air support element. It should be me. The words came out more forcefully than Megan intended. I know that terrain better than anyone in the squadron. I've been studying the enemy patterns for months. You could what, Captain? Harrison's voice was gentle but firm. Disobey orders. Steal an aircraft. What exactly are you proposing? The question brought Megan up short. What was she proposing? She took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. I don't know, sir. I just know that mission parameters match exactly what I've been training for. Harrison regarded her for a long moment. Your father faced a similar situation in '91. Intelligence had identified a kill zone. Command was sending in teams without adequate air support contingencies. James warned them just like you tried to warn Reynolds. He paused. When they didn't listen, he went anyway. Unauthorized. And he died. Megan finished the thought. Yes, but he saved 47 Marines that day. Harrison stood up and moved to a filing cabinet in the corner of his office. The official report says he violated procedures and got himself killed. What it doesn't mention is that those Marines would have died without him. He pulled a folder from the cabinet and handed it to Megan. These are the original Project Thunderbolt files. They're still technically classified, so I'd appreciate it if you didn't mention where you got them. Megan took the folder with reverence. Why are you giving me these? Because Cooper's air support plan has a 60% chance of success at best. The approach vectors he's chosen don't account for the terrain features that affect targeting accuracy. If the mission goes sideways, those SEALs are going to need someone who can do what the rulebook says is impossible. Harrison's eyes met hers. I'm not telling you to disobey orders, Captain, but I am telling you to be ready. Ready for what? For the moment when following the rules means watching good people die. Harrison's voice carried the weight of experience. Because that moment is coming, and when it does, you'll have to make the same choice your father made. Megan looked down at the folder in her hands, then back at Harrison. Did my father make the right choice? Harrison's expression softened. The 47 Marines who came home to their families would say yes. The military justice system would say no. He placed a hand on her shoulder. The harder question is, could you live with yourself if you didn't try? As Megan left Harrison's office, his question echoed in her mind. Could she live with herself if she didn't try? The answer, she realized, had been decided long ago, on the day she first learned how her father had died. Not as a reckless pilot who ignored the rules, but as a hero who understood that sometimes rules had to be broken to save lives. The real question wasn't whether she could make that same choice. It was whether she would have the courage to face the consequences, just as he had. 2 weeks after Operation Granite Shield's successful completion, the whispers began. They started in the maintenance bay, spreading through the squadron like smoke from a damaged engine. Megan first noticed the change when Chief Master Sergeant Williams asked her to re-verify weapons inventory counts she'd already confirmed twice. His tone carried an edge of suspicion that hadn't been there before. Riley, these numbers for the GAU-8 ammunition seem high, Williams said, tapping his clipboard with barely concealed irritation. You sure you counted these correctly? Because if rounds are going missing, that's a security issue we can't ignore. Megan had triple-checked those numbers. She always did. Her attention to detail was the one aspect of her performance that had never been questioned until now. Chief, I've verified those counts personally. The numbers are accurate. We received an unexpected resupply shipment last Tuesday that accounted for the increase. Williams studied her face as if searching for signs of deception. Unexpected shipment that you happened to be present for. Convenient timing, don't you think? The implication hung in the air like cordite after a weapons test. Megan felt her cheeks flush as the meaning became clear. Chief, are you suggesting I'm somehow involved in ammunition theft? I'm not implying anything, Riley. I'm just saying that these discrepancies started showing up around the same time you began spending extra hours in areas that aren't really your responsibility. Makes a person wonder what you're really doing during all those late-night equipment checks. The accusation was as unfair as it was devastating. Megan's late-night hours were spent studying tactical manuals and running simulator training, activities that had nothing to do with weapons accountability, but she couldn't explain her actual activities without revealing the extent of her unauthorized preparation for missions she wasn't assigned to fly. The questioning intensified the following days. Captain Cooper began scrutinizing her maintenance reports with unusual thoroughness, questioning technical assessments that had previously been accepted without comment. During a routine briefing about aircraft readiness, he challenged her evaluation of an A-10's hydraulic system, an evaluation that subsequent inspection proved completely accurate. Riley, your report indicates this aircraft is fully mission capable, but you're not a certified technician. How can you be certain your evaluation is correct? Sir, I worked with Senior Airman Martinez to verify all systems. The aircraft meets all the standards for combat operations. Megan kept her voice level despite the growing frustration that threatened to overwhelm her professional composure. Martinez was conducting routine maintenance. You were observing and asking questions that went well beyond your assigned duties. Some people are wondering why a logistics specialist needs such detailed knowledge of weapon systems and targeting computers. The room fell silent. Other pilots and support staff exchanged glances that ranged from curiosity to concern. Megan realized that her months of preparation, her efforts to expand her knowledge beyond the narrow confines of her assigned role, were being reinterpreted as something suspicious, even potentially dangerous. I believe understanding our equipment makes me better at my job, she replied carefully. If I know how systems work, I can better anticipate maintenance needs and ensure mission readiness. Major Reynolds entered the conversation with the kind of casual authority that made his words carry extra weight. Riley, that's admirable in theory, but we've noticed you spending considerable time studying materials that fall outside your area of responsibility. Tactical manuals, terrain analysis, special operations procedures, these aren't logistics functions. The net was tightening around her. Every hour she'd spent in preparation, every manual she'd studied, every question she'd asked was being twisted into evidence of inappropriate ambition or worse. Her dedication was becoming a liability, her initiative reframed as insubordination. Sir, I'm trying to be the best officer I can be. If that means learning about aspects of our mission beyond my immediate duties, it means you're not focused on your actual responsibilities. Reynolds cut her off. We need logistics personnel who concentrate on logistics, not aspiring pilots who think they know better than their commanding officers. The words cut deep because they contained the ultimate dismissal. She was an aspiring pilot, not a real one. Despite her training, her qualifications, and her demonstrated competence, she was still seen as someone playing at being a military aviator rather than actually being a one. Captain Martinez approached her after the briefing, her expression troubled. Megan, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you planning something? Because the way you've been acting, the extra study time, the technical questions, the tactical analysis, it's making people nervous. Making people nervous about what? Megan asked, though she already knew the answer. About whether you're planning to do something unauthorized. About whether you're planning to take matters into your own hands if you don't get the assignments you want. Martinez's voice carried genuine concern mixed with official caution. Because if that's what this is about, you need to stop before you destroy your career entirely. Megan looked at Martinez, seeing a fellow officer who had survived in this environment by accepting limitations and following rules. What if the rules are wrong? She asked quietly. What if following procedures means people die when they could be saved? Then that's not your decision to make, Martinez replied firmly. That's what command structure is for. You follow orders, you trust the system, and you don't try to be the hero in someone else's story. But as Megan walked back to her quarters that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone else's story was about to become hers, whether the chain of command approved or not. The call to Major Reynolds' office came at 1400 hours on a Tuesday afternoon that had started with unusual calm. Megan knocked on the doorframe exactly on time, her uniform pressed to regulation standards, and her mind prepared for what she suspected would be a career-defining conversation. The office smelled of coffee and the kind of institutional authority that permeated every surface of military command spaces. Enter, Reynolds' voice commanded. Megan stepped inside to find herself facing not just her squadron commander, but also Colonel Sarah Hayes from the Inspector General's office, and Captain Martinez, who couldn't meet her eyes. The arrangement of chairs suggested this was less a meeting than a formal proceeding. Sit down, Riley, Reynolds said, gesturing to a chair positioned directly across from his desk. We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to my attention regarding your conduct and focus over the past several months. Colonel Hayes opened a folder that Megan recognized as her complete service record. Every efficiency report, every training score, every comment from supervisors had been compiled into a document that would determine her future in the Air Force. Captain Riley, you've been an exemplary soldier in many respects. Your technical knowledge is outstanding, your attention to detail is exceptional, and your dedication to duty is evident. The pause that followed carried the weight of an approaching however that would negate everything positive that had just been said. However, Hayes continued, there are growing concerns about the scope of your interests and activities. Multiple supervisors have reported that you've been studying materials and developing skills that extend well beyond your assigned duties as a logistics coordinator. Megan felt her jaw tighten, but she maintained her composure. Ma'am, I believe that understanding all aspects of our mission makes me a more effective officer. Knowledge of tactical procedures and aircraft capabilities directly supports my ability to... Your ability to do what exactly? Reynolds interrupted. Because your job description doesn't include tactical analysis, mission planning, or combat operations. Your job is to ensure that aircraft are properly maintained and equipped for missions that other people plan and execute. The reduction of her role to its most basic components felt like a deliberate diminishment of her worth as an officer. Captain Martinez shifted uncomfortably in her chair, finally speaking up. Megan, we've also noticed that you've been spending considerable time in the flight simulator during off-duty hours. The access logs show you've logged more simulator time than some of our active combat pilots. I'm maintaining my flight proficiency, Megan replied, knowing how weak the justification sounded even as she spoke it. Regulation requires all qualified pilots to maintain minimum flight hours, and the simulator counts toward. You're not on the flight rotation, Hayes said bluntly. You haven't been assigned to active combat missions, so there is no requirement for you to maintain combat proficiency. The simulator time you've been logging suggests you're preparing for operations you are not authorized to conduct. The accusation hung in the air like an unexploded ordnance. Megan realized that her months of preparation were being interpreted as evidence of potential insubordination, possibly even planning for unauthorized action. Her dedication had become a threat to good order and discipline. Colonel Hayes leaned forward, her expression serious but not unkind. Captain Riley, we need to be very clear about your role and responsibilities going forward. Effective immediately, your access to tactical manuals, mission planning documents, and flight simulators is restricted to those directly necessary for your assigned duties. The words hit like a physical blow. Megan felt months of preparation and knowledge acquisition being stripped away by administrative fiat. Ma'am, that seems excessive for someone who's never violated any regulation or never violated any written regulation, Hayes corrected. But you have violated the implicit understanding that officers focus on their assigned responsibilities rather than pursuing unauthorized objectives. This isn't punishment, O'Reilly. It's guidance intended to help you refocus your efforts where they belong. Martinez spoke up again, her voice carrying what might have been sympathy. Megan, the Air Force needs officers who excel within their assigned roles, not officers who constantly push against the boundaries of those roles. You can have a successful career if you embrace what you're actually here to do. And what if what I'm here to do isn't enough? Megan asked, her voice tightening as emotion threatened to overcome her professional facade. What if there comes a time when following orders and staying in my assigned lane means watching people die who could be saved? Reynolds' expression hardened. Then that's not your problem to solve, Captain. That's a decision for people with the rank, experience, and authority to make such calls. Your problem, your only problem, is ensuring that aircraft are maintained and equipped according to regulations and procedures. The meeting concluded with a formal counseling statement that would become part of her permanent record. As Megan signed the document acknowledging the restrictions placed on her activities, she realized that the Air Force had just told her to stop being the pilot she'd trained to become and accept being the administrator they wanted her to be. Walking back to her quarters, she felt the weight of institutional limitations settling around her like a flight suit that didn't fit properly. But she also felt something else, a quiet determination that no administrative order could eliminate the knowledge she'd already gained or the skills she'd already developed. They could restrict her access to manuals and simulators, but they couldn't restrict her mind. And when the inevitable crisis came, because she was certain that it would come, she would be ready to act regardless of whether her actions fell within the narrow boundaries her superiors had drawn around her career. That night, Megan pulled out a sheet of stationery and began to write a letter to her brother Michael, who was serving as an Army Ranger deployed in another part of Afghanistan. She wrote about the restrictions placed on her, about her frustrations with a system that seemed designed to limit potential rather than nurture it. But most importantly, she wrote about her father. Dad always told us that there would come a moment in our careers when we'd have to choose between what was expected and what was right, she wrote. I think my moment is coming, Mike, and I'm not sure I'll make the same choice Dad did, but I know I'll have to live with whatever I decide for the rest of my life. She sealed the letter knowing it might be the last one she ever wrote if her instincts about the coming crisis proved correct. Because whatever came next, Megan Riley was certain of one thing. She was her father's daughter, and when American lives were on the line, she would do whatever it took to save them, regardless of the personal cost. The emergency klaxon shattered the relative quiet of Edwards Air Force Base at 13:47 hours on what had begun as an unremarkable Thursday afternoon. Megan was conducting routine equipment inventory in Supply Building C when the piercing alarm sent every person on base into immediate high alert. She dropped her clipboard and ran toward the operations center, her heart already racing with the kind of adrenaline that came from months of preparation finally meeting reality. The operations center buzzed with controlled chaos. Radio operators sat hunched over their equipment, voices sharp with urgency as they coordinated with multiple units across the theater. Digital displays showed aircraft positions, weather conditions, and the kind of real-time intelligence that transformed routine military operations into life-or-death emergencies. "Sir, we have confirmation," Senior Airman Peterson announced from his communication station. "SEAL Team 7 and supporting elements are pinned down in the Korangal Valley. Initial count is 381 personnel surrounded by an estimated 800 enemy fighters." Megan felt her blood turn cold. 381 American Special Operations personnel, nearly twice the size of a typical SEAL deployment, trapped in terrain that she had studied obsessively for months. It was the scenario from her simulator training brought to terrifying life. Major Reynolds stood at the center of the operations hub, his face grim, as he processed the magnitude of the crisis unfolding. "What is the tactical situation?" Reynolds demanded, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of multiple radio transmissions. Captain Cooper stepped forward with a tablet displaying satellite imagery of the valley. "Enemy forces have established overlapping fields of fire from 3 ridge lines. They have heavy machine guns, RPs, and at least 2 confirmed surface-to-air missile sites. The SEALs are in a depression at the valley floor with minimal cover and no viable extraction routes." Megan studied the displays from her position near the back of the operations center. The terrain features were exactly what she had expected: a natural kill zone where enemy forces could maintain superior firing positions, while American forces were trapped in low ground with limited maneuverability. It was the scenario she had wargamed dozens of times in her unauthorized simulator sessions. "What about helicopter extraction?" Reynolds asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Negative, sir," replied Chief Master Sergeant Williams. "The enemy SAM sites have overlapping coverage of any potential landing zones. We lost 1 Chinook already trying to get close enough for rope extraction. No way to get helicopters in there without eliminating those missile positions first." "Then we eliminate them," Reynolds said flatly. "What is our air support capability?" Cooper consulted his tactical display. "We have 4 F-16s inbound from Bagram, ETA 25 minutes. Problem is the enemy positions are too close to our personnel for conventional bombing runs. We need precision strikes that can eliminate threats without causing friendly casualties." "How close are we talking?" Reynolds asked. "Danger close does not begin to describe it, sir. Enemy positions are within 50 meters of our people in some areas. We need surgical strikes with zero margin for error." Megan felt her pulse quicken. This was exactly the scenario that required the kind of precision close air support that the A-10 was designed to provide. The aircraft's GAU-8 cannon could deliver devastating firepower with pinpoint accuracy, and its titanium armor could survive the kind of ground fire that would destroy faster, less resilient aircraft. She stepped forward, her voice clear, despite the chaos around her. "Sir, the A-10s could handle this mission. We have 4 aircraft on the line fully loaded and ready for immediate deployment." Reynolds turned towards her, his expression shifting from intense focus to irritation. "Riley, you are supposed to be conducting equipment inventory, not monitoring tactical communications." "Sir, I am qualified on the A-10 and familiar with close air support procedures. This is exactly the kind of mission that aircraft was designed for." "This mission requires pilots with extensive combat experience and proven ability to operate under extreme pressure," Cooper interjected. "We cannot risk 381 lives on untested pilots." Megan felt the familiar burn of dismissal, but this time the stakes were too high for her to accept it quietly. "With respect, sir, who do you have available with more close air support experience than me? Walker is deployed to Qatar. Henderson is on medical leave, and Kowalski's aircraft is down for maintenance." "The F-16s will have to do," Reynolds said firmly. "They can use precision-guided munitions too." "Sir," interrupted Peterson from his communication station, "SEAL Team 7 reports they are taking heavy casualties. They estimate they can hold their position for maybe another hour before they are overrun." The timeline had just collapsed. Whatever air support was going to save those 381 Americans would have to arrive within the next 60 minutes, or there would be nothing left to save. Megan looked at the tactical display showing the trapped SEALs and the enemy positions surrounding them, then at her superiors' faces as they struggled with a crisis that exceeded their conventional solutions. "Sir, I can get them out." The operations center fell silent except for the constant chatter of radio communications. Reynolds stared at her as if she had just proposed something fundamentally impossible. Riley, you are not authorized for combat operations. Those authorizations will not matter if all 381 of those SEALs are dead, Megan replied. I know that terrain. I know the targeting solutions required, and I know I can make the shots that will save their lives. Cooper shook his head. Even if we were willing to consider it, which we are not, you would be flying alone without backup. It is a suicide mission. Megan looked around the operations center at the faces of people who had spent months telling her she was not ready for real combat. Now, with 381 American lives hanging in the balance, she was the only pilot available who might be able to save them. Then it is a good thing I have been preparing for suicide missions, she said quietly. The silence in the operations center stretched for what felt like an eternity before Major Reynolds' voice cut through the tension like a blade. Absolutely not, Riley. I will not authorize an unauthorized pilot to conduct a solo close air support mission against overwhelming enemy forces. It is not just suicide, it is military incompetence. Megan felt her chest tighten as she watched 381 American lives being written off by commanders too rigid to consider unconventional solutions. Sir, what other options do we have? The F-16s cannot provide the precision required. The helicopters cannot penetrate the air defenses, and every minute we delay means more casualties. Cooper stepped forward, his expression a mixture of frustration and condescension. Riley, you are thinking like someone who has watched too many movies. This is not about heroics. It is about realistic tactical capabilities. You are a logistics officer with minimal combat experience, attempting to tackle a mission that would challenge our most seasoned pilots. I have over 400 hours in the A-10 and 400 hours of training flights in simulator time, Megan insisted. You have never conducted close air support under enemy fire, Cooper interrupted sharply. You have never had to maintain target acquisition while surface-to-air missiles or tracking your aircraft. You have never faced the kind of split-second decisions that separate successful missions from catastrophic failures. Colonel Hayes, who had been observing the exchange from near the communication station, finally spoke up. Captain Riley, even if your flying skills were adequate to the challenge, which they are not, the mission parameters exceed any reasonable risk assessment, you would be flying alone into a heavily defended area with multiple SAM sites and hundreds of enemy fighters. It is not just suicide, it is recklessness. Megan looked around the operations center at the faces of officers who had already decided that 381 SEALs were acceptable casualties rather than risk one unauthorized pilot on an unconventional mission. So what is the alternative? We wait for the F-16s to arrive and hope they can somehow provide precision strikes close enough to help without hitting our own people. The alternative, Reynolds said firmly, is that we follow established procedures and deploy assets according to their intended capabilities. The F-16 pilots are highly experienced and fully qualified for precision strike missions, but not for close air support in mountainous terrain against danger-close targets, Megan pressed. The F-16 was not designed for that mission profile. The A-10 was. The A-10 was designed for experienced pilots operating as part of coordinated air support packages. It was not designed for solo missions by officers who have never seen an actual combat. Senior Airman Peterson's voice crackled across the operations center. Sir, SEAL Team 7 reports enemy forces are advancing on their position. They are requesting immediate air support or emergency extraction. The urgency in Peterson's voice seemed to crystallize something in Reynolds' expression. He turned to Cooper with the kind of decisive authority that ended debates. Get me a direct line to the F-16 flight lead. I want precision coordinates for every enemy position and a detailed strike plan that minimizes risk to our personnel. Sir, Peterson said after a moment, the F-16 flight leader reports they can engage targets that are at least 100 meters from friendly positions. Anything closer than that exceeds their precision capabilities. Megan felt her stomach drop. She had studied the tactical situation extensively, and she knew that most of the enemy positions were within 50 meters of the trapped SEALs. The F-16s could eliminate some threats, but they could not create the kind of escape corridor that would allow 381 people to break out of the encirclement. So they engage what they can, Reynolds said. Maybe if we eliminate some of the enemy positions, the SEALs can maneuver to more defensible terrain. Sir Megan said, her voice carrying the kind of quiet intensity that came from absolute certainty. That will not work. The terrain does not allow for tactical movement. The SEALs are trapped in a natural depression with enemy forces controlling all the high ground. Unless we eliminate the positions that are danger close to our people, they are going to be overrun. Hayes looked at her with something that might have been pity. Captain, you are describing a mission that requires capabilities you simply do not possess. Close air support at danger close ranges demands the kind of experience that comes from years of combat operations, not months of simulator training. It demands precision and knowledge of the terrain, both of which I have, Megan insisted. You have theoretical knowledge, Cooper corrected. You have never had to apply that knowledge while enemy forces are trying to kill you. Combat changes everything. Your stress level was your decision-making moral ability to maintain fine motor control. Training cannot simulate the psychological pressure of actual combat. Reynolds' radio crackled with an update from the F-16 flight lead. Kandahar base, this is Viper 1. We are 15 minutes out, but I need to confirm. Are we authorized to engage targets within 100 meters of friendly forces? Because from what I am seeing on satellite, that is where most of the enemy positions are located. Reynolds closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of command visible in his expression. Viper 1 negative. Maintain minimum safe distance from friendly positions. We cannot risk fratricide. Megan watched as the last realistic chance to save 381 Americans disappeared into the rigid adherence to procedures that prioritize avoiding mistakes over achieving victory. She looked at the tactical display one more time, memorizing the positions of enemy forces and friendly personnel, calculating the targeting solutions that could create an escape route if anyone was willing to attempt them. Sir, she said quietly, I formally request permission to attempt the close air support mission. Request denied, Reynolds replied without hesitation. Captain Riley, you are ordered to return to your assigned duties and leave tactical operations to qualified personnel. As Megan turned to leave the operations center, she heard Peterson's voice over the radio. Sir SEAL Team 7 reports they are down to less than 30 minutes of ammunition. They are requesting any available support before they are completely overrun. 30 minutes. That was how long 381 American warriors had left before their position was overrun by enemy forces, while the only pilot who might be able to save them was ordered to return to counting spare parts. Megan stood outside the operations center for exactly 30 seconds, listening to the urgent radio chatter bleeding through the partially open door. Inside, Major Reynolds was coordinating with the incoming F-16s, while Senior Airman Peterson provided increasingly desperate updates from SEAL Team 7. The mathematics of the situation were brutally simple. 381 American Special Operations personnel had less than 30 minutes before being overrun, and the only air support authorized to help them could not engage the targets that mattered most. She thought about Captain Martinez's words from weeks earlier. You follow orders, you trust the system, and you do not try to be the hero in someone else's story. The advice made sense from a career perspective, from the standpoint of someone who wanted to survive and eventually thrive within the military's institutional framework. But standing there listening to American warriors face annihilation while bureaucratic procedures prevented effective action, Megan realized that some moments transcended career considerations. Walking quickly toward her quarters, she mentally calculated the time required for her next actions. 5 minutes to reach her room and retrieve her flight gear. 3 minutes to reach the flight line. 2 minutes for abbreviated pre-flight inspection. The A-10, designated as Aircraft 297, had been fully fueled and armed that morning for a training mission that had been canceled due to weather conditions in the practice area. In 10 minutes, she could be airborne and heading toward the Korangal Valley. In 10 minutes, she could also be committing career suicide and violating every regulation that governed military aviation operations. Her hands shook slightly as she opened her equipment locker and began pulling on her flight suit. The familiar routine of preparing for flight should have been calming, but the magnitude of what she was about to attempt made every movement feel charged with significance. She was crossing a line that could not be uncrossed, making a decision that would define the rest of her life, regardless of the outcome. The letter to her brother was still tucked into her personal gear from the night before. She pulled it out and added a brief postscript. If you are reading this, it means I chose to act when action was needed, regardless of the consequences. 381. American heroes are trapped in dying while people who should help them debate procedures and authorization. I cannot stand by and watch good people die when I might be able to save them. I love you, Megan. She sealed the letter and left it on her pillow, where it would be found if she did not return. Then she shouldered her survival gear and headed toward the flight line, each step taking her further from the safety of obedience and closer to the uncertainty of unauthorized action. Aircraft 297 sat on the tarmac like a predator waiting for release. The A-10 Thunderbolt II was not a beautiful aircraft by conventional standards. It was too angular, too utilitarian, too obviously designed for violence rather than elegance. But to Megan, it represented the perfect fusion of precision and power, a machine capable of delivering devastating firepower with surgical accuracy when operated by someone who understood its capabilities. Her pre-flight inspection was thorough, but rapid oil levels, hydraulic pressure, ammunition load, targeting system functionality, every critical system checked and verified in less than 2 minutes. The aircraft carried a full load of 30mm ammunition for its GAU-8 cannon, plus Maverick missiles and rocket pods that would give her multiple options for engaging different types of targets. As she climbed into the cockpit, Megan's radio crackled with the ongoing coordination between base operations and the F-16 flight. Viper 1, be advised that friendly forces are marked with infrared strobes. Maintain minimum engagement distance of 100 meters from any strobe signature. Copy Kandahar base. Understand minimum engagement distance 100 meters from friendlies. Be advised most enemy positions appear to be within that minimum distance. The conversation confirmed what Megan already knew. The F-16s would be able to engage some enemy positions, but they could not eliminate the threats that were actually killing the trapped SEALs. Their precision-guided munitions were accurate enough for targets that were safely separated from friendly forces, but they lacked the surgical precision required for danger. Close engagements. Engine startup procedures flowed through muscle memory as Megan brought aircraft 297 to life. The twin turbofan engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, and the aircraft systems began their automatic checks and calibrations. In 90 seconds, she would be ready for takeoff. In 15 minutes, she would be over the Korangal Valley, ready to attempt the most challenging close air support mission of her career. She switched her radio to the frequency used by SEAL Team 7 and listened to their tactical communications. The voice of their team leader was calm despite the desperate situation. Control, this is Trident Actual. We are down to 15 minutes of ammunition and taking casualties. Whatever air support you can provide, we need it now. With 15 minutes of ammunition less than her flight time to the target area. By the time she arrived over the valley, the SEALs might already be overrun their position, silent except for the radio calls of enemy forces claiming victory. She keyed her radio to transmit on the emergency frequency monitored by all American forces in the region. Any station, any station. This is Thunderbolt 7 departing Edwards for close air support mission in the Korangal Valley. If anyone copies this transmission, be advised that 381 American heroes are about to die unless someone is willing to break some rules to save them. She released her radio key, taxied toward the runway, and prepared to find out whether her months of unauthorized preparation had been enough to attempt the impossible. Colonel Frank Harrison was reviewing maintenance logs in his office when the alert came through. The specific tone of the emergency signal told him everything he needed to know even before he heard the details. Someone had just taken an A-10 without authorization. He did not need to ask who it was. He had seen the look in Megan's eyes when she left his office the day before, had recognized in her the same determination that had driven her father 17 years earlier. James Riley had made his choice, and now his daughter was making hers. Harrison reached for his secure phone, then hesitated. A single call could ground Megan before she even left the runway. The base security protocol would automatically scramble fighters to intercept an unauthorized aircraft. A few words from him could stop her from throwing away her career, possibly her freedom, on a mission that might well be suicidal. But as his hand hovered over the phone, he thought about the 381 Americans trapped in that valley. Men who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignments, who had placed their lives in the hands of a system that was now declaring them expendable because the conventional response options were inadequate. Harrison had served that system loyally for 30 years. He had followed the rules, accepted the limitations, worked within the established framework, even when he knew there were better ways to accomplish the mission. He had watched James Riley die, trying to save lives when the system would not, and in the aftermath, he had chosen to adapt rather than challenge, to serene rather than sacrifice. Now, on what might be the last day of his military career, Frank Harrison made the choice that James Riley would have made. He turned away from the phone and instead pulled up the base security protocols on his computer. With a few keystrokes, he initiated an unscheduled security system update that would knock the runway surveillance offline for exactly 10 minutes. Long enough for Megan to get clear of the base before anyone could stop her. It was not much, just a small disruption in the system that would give her a fighting chance to save those SEALs. But it was also a declaration of where his true loyalties lay. Not with regulations or procedures, but with the warriors who put their lives on the line every day. As he finished the security override, his office door burst open. Captain Jake Cooper stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Colonel Riley just stole an A-10. She is on the runway right now." Harrison looked up calmly. The security system seems to be down for an update. I can't see anything on the monitors." Cooper's eyes narrowed as understanding dawned. "You're helping her." "I'm updating base security, Captain, as is my responsibility as technical operations officer." "This is treason, Cooper said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "No, son. This is what happens when the system fails the people it's supposed to protect." Harrison gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Now you have a choice to make. You can run back to Major Reynolds and report what you've seen, or you can give those 381 SEALs a fighting chance." Cooper hesitated, the conflict evident on his face. Then slowly he closed the office door and took the seat. "How long will your system update keep the surveillance down?" 10 minutes. After that, they'll know exactly what happened and who did it." Cooper nodded. "Then we have 10 minutes to figure out how to give Riley the support she's going to need. Because if she's going to save those SEALs, she'll need more than just determination." Harrison felt a surge of respect for the younger officer. Perhaps the system was not as rigid as he had feared. Perhaps there were still men and women within it who understood that sometimes the mission had to come before the rules. Aircraft 297 lifted off from Edwards Air Force Base at 14:23 hours, with the kind of smooth authority that came from perfect weather conditions and a pilot whose nerves had transformed fear into focused determination. Megan climbed to 15,000 feet and set course for the Korangal Valley, her hands steady on the controls, despite the magnitude of what she was attempting. Behind her, she left a base that did not yet know one of its pilots had just committed the most significant act of military insubordination in recent memory. The flight to the valley took 12 minutes, during which Megan monitored the increasingly desperate radio traffic from SEAL Team 7. Their ammunition was running critically low, and enemy forces were advancing on their position from multiple directions. The F-16s had arrived and were engaging targets on the outer perimeter, but their minimum engagement distance kept them from eliminating the threats that posed the most immediate danger to the trapped Americans. "Control, this is Trident Actual," came the voice of the SEAL team leader, his professional calm beginning to crack under the pressure of watching his men die. "We need close air support on Grid Square Lima 742 immediately. Enemy positions are within 50 meters of our location and advancing." "Trident Actual, this is Viper 1, replied the F-16 flight lead. "I have visual on the target area, but enemy positions are too close to your location for precision strikes. I cannot engage without significant risk of fratricide." Megan keyed her radio, knowing that her transmission would be heard by every American unit in the theater. "Trident Actual, this is Thunderbolt 7. I am inbound to your location with close air support. Mark your position with infrared strobes and be prepared to designate enemy targets." The radio silence that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then the SEAL team leader's voice returned, tinged with disbelief and hope. "Thunderbolt 7, confirm you're authorized for danger close engagement." "Trident Actual, I am authorized to save American lives by any means necessary. Designate your targets." As the Korangal Valley came into view below her aircraft, Megan could see the tactical situation with perfect clarity. The SEALs were trapped in a natural depression surrounded by rocky outcroppings that provided excellent firing positions for enemy forces. Muzzle flashes marked enemy positions along 3 ridge lines, creating a crossfire that had turned the valley floor into a killing zone. Her first pass would be critical. She needed to eliminate enough enemy positions to disrupt their coordinated attack while avoiding any shots that might endanger the trapped Americans. The margin for error was measured in meters, not the hundreds of yards that characterize normal close air support operations. Thunderbolt 7, this is Kandahar Base. Major Reynolds' voice crackled through her headset, sharp with authority and barely controlled anger. You are ordered to return to base immediately. You are not authorized for this mission. Megan switched off her radio's reception of the command frequency, maintaining only the tactical frequencies that would allow her to coordinate with the SEALs. She had known this moment would come when her unauthorized action would be discovered and officially condemned. But 381 American warriors did not have time for her to debate authorization with officers who had already decided those lives were acceptable losses. Trident Actual, I am beginning my attack run. Maintain your infrared strobes and stay low. Megan rolled into a steep dive that brought her aircraft screaming toward the valley floor at a speed that would have been considered reckless under normal circumstances. But these were not normal circumstances, and conventional tactics were not going to save the people depending on her. Her first target was a heavy machine gun position on the eastern ridge that had been pouring fire into the SEAL position for the past hour. The GAU-8 cannon fired in controlled bursts that sent 30mm rounds into the rocky outcropping with surgical precision. The enemy position disappeared in a cloud of dust and debris, its threat eliminated without endangering any American personnel. Banking hard to the left, Megan lined up on her second target, a group of enemy fighters who had been advancing down the northern slope toward the trapped SEALs. Her cannon fire swept across their position like a scythe, eliminating the threat and buying precious time for the Americans below. Thunderbolt 7, that is good hits on both targets, came the SEAL team leader's voice, now carrying a note of genuine hope. We have got enemy movement on the western ridge approximately 75 meters from our position. 75 meters well within the danger close range that had prevented the F-16s from engaging. Megan rolled into another attack run, her targeting system locked onto enemy positions that were closer to friendly forces than anyone had ever attempted to engage with the A-10's cannon. The shots had to be perfect at this range. Any error would result in American casualties that would make her unauthorized mission a catastrophic failure rather than a desperate success. But as she lined up her targeting reticle and felt the familiar vibration of the GAU-8 cannon engaging, Megan knew that her months of preparation had been leading to exactly this moment. Behind her, radio calls from Kandahar Base demanded her immediate return. Ahead of her, 381 American heroes waited for someone to prove that the impossible was just another word for something that had not been attempted by the right person yet. The command center at Kandahar Air Base erupted in controlled chaos as Major Reynolds stared at the radar display showing Aircraft 297's unauthorized departure. The blip representing Megan's A-10 was moving steadily toward the Karangal Valley, each mile taking her further from the safety of base operations and deeper into a situation that could end her career or her life. Sir, we have confirmation that Captain Riley has departed in Aircraft 297 without authorization. Senior Airman Peterson reported, his voice tight with the kind of professional stress that came from witnessing unprecedented violations of military protocol. She is not responding to our calls on the command frequency. Colonel Hayes stood beside Reynolds, her expression shifting between disbelief and grudging respect. Major, one of your pilots has just committed the most significant act of insubordination I have witnessed in 20 years of military service. What is your response? Reynolds' jaw worked silently for a moment as he processed the magnitude of what Megan had done. She had not just violated direct orders. She had stolen a multi-million-dollar aircraft to conduct an unauthorized combat mission in direct defiance of her commanding officer. By any measure of military justice, she had just destroyed her career and possibly earned herself a court-martial. Get me a direct line to the F-16 flight lead. I need to know exactly what is happening over that valley. Captain Cooper quickly established communication with Viper 1, whose voice crackled through the command center speakers with a mixture of professional bewilderment and tactical concern. Kandahar Base, this is Viper 1. Be advised, we have an A-10 conducting close air support operations in our area of responsibility. The pilot appears to be engaging targets at extremely close range to friendly forces. How close? Hayes demanded. Ma'am, closer than I have ever seen attempted in combat operations. This pilot is putting rounds within 25 meters of American personnel. It is either the most precise flying I have ever witnessed or the most reckless. Peterson's radio crackled with transmissions from SEAL Team 7, their tactical frequency now patched into the command center's audio system. The voice of Trident Actual filled the operations room with real-time reports from the battlefield. Thunderbolt 7, that is another confirmed hit on enemy positions. You just eliminated the machine gun nest that was pinning down our eastern flank. Reynolds felt something cold settle in his stomach as he listened to the tactical communications. Megan was not just conducting an unauthorized mission. She was succeeding at it. Her precision strikes were systematically eliminating enemy positions that had been considered untouchable due to their proximity to American forces. Sir, we have confirmation that SEAL Team 7 reports they have regained tactical mobility. Peterson announced, his voice tinged with disbelief. They are requesting continued close air support to establish an extraction corridor. Captain Martinez, who had been silent during the crisis, finally spoke up. Major, regardless of the unauthorized nature of her actions, Captain Riley appears to be saving American lives. What are our options for supporting her mission? Supporting her mission, Hayes replied sharply. She is conducting an unauthorized combat operation in violation of direct orders. The appropriate response is to order her immediate return to base and prepare for disciplinary action. Cooper pointed to the tactical display showing the Korengal Valley. Ma'am, with respect, she is currently the only air asset capable of providing the precision strikes necessary to extract those SEALs. The F-16s cannot engage targets that close to friendly forces. Reynolds found himself facing a command decision that would define not just Megan's career, but his own leadership legacy. He could continue demanding her return, potentially costing 381 American lives to preserve military discipline, or he could provide support for an unauthorized mission that was proving more effective than any conventional response. Viper 1, this is Kandahar Base. What is your assessment of Thunderbolt 7's tactical performance? The F-16 pilot's response was immediate and unequivocal. Sir, this is the most precise close air support I have ever observed. The pilot is placing rounds exactly where they need to go without any risk to friendly forces. Whoever is flying that A-10 knows what they are doing. Hayes stepped closer to Reynolds, her voice low, but carrying the weight of institutional authority. Major, if you provide any form of support or endorsement for this unauthorized action, you will be complicit in the violation of military regulations. Think carefully about your next decision. But before Reynolds could respond, Peterson's voice cut through the debate with an urgency that silenced all other considerations. Sir, SEAL Team 7 reports they are beginning tactical movement toward the extraction point. They are requesting continued air support to maintain the corridor that Thunderbolt 7 has created. On the tactical display, the blue icons representing American forces were moving for the first time in hours, advancing through gaps in enemy positions that Megan's precision strikes had carved out of what had been an impenetrable defensive network. Her unauthorized mission was not just succeeding, it was accomplishing what conventional air support had deemed impossible. Sir, Cooper said quietly, 381 American warriors are moving towards safety because one pilot refused to accept that the mission was impossible. Whatever disciplinary action follows right now, she is proving that sometimes breaking rules saves lives. Reynolds stared at the display showing American forces finally able to maneuver toward extraction, while an unauthorized A-10 pilot provided the kind of precision air support that only existed in training manuals and tactical fantasies. In 12 minutes, Megan Riley had accomplished more than hours of conventional air support operations. Now he had to decide whether to support her success or condemn her insubordination. The A-10's threat warning system screamed as a surface-to-air missile locked onto Megan's aircraft. She had been expecting it, had been waiting for the enemy to reveal the position of their mobile SAM sites. Now, as the missile launch indicator flashed on her control panel, she initiated the evasive maneuver sequence she had practiced hundreds of times in simulation. The A-10 was not built for speed or agility by conventional fighter standards, but in the hands of a pilot who understood its capabilities, it could perform feats that defied expectations. Megan pushed the aircraft into a steep climb, then rolled into a diving turn that took her below the ridgeline just as the missile passed overhead. Thunderbolt 7 SAM launched from your 3 o'clock secondary position. Came the urgent call from Trident Actual. I see it, Megan replied, already lining up her next attack run. The missile launch had revealed the position of a mobile SAM site that had been hidden in a cave entrance on the western ridge. It was precisely positioned to threaten any conventional rescue aircraft that might attempt to reach the SEALs. More importantly, it was within 30 meters of a group of American forces attempting to move toward the extraction point. This would be her most challenging shot yet. The cave opening was small and the proximity to friendly forces left zero margin for error. A single misplaced round could kill the very people she was trying to save. Megan took a deep breath, focusing on the targeting solution she had calculated. The official specifications for the A-10's targeting system stated that this shot was impossible. The minimum safe distance for engaging targets near friendly forces was 75 meters according to the manual. She was about to attempt a precision strike at less than half that distance. But Colonel Harrison's words came back to her. The official specifications were conservative. The real capabilities of the aircraft exceeded what was documented in the flight manuals. If the pilot was skilled enough, precise enough, and determined enough. Trident Actual, this is Thunderbolt 7. I am engaging the SAM site at your west position. Have your men take cover. Thunderbolt 7, be advised, that is danger close. Repeat, danger close to friendly forces. I know, trust me. Megan lined up her approach, calculating wind drift, air density, and the ballistic trajectory of her cannon rounds with a precision that went beyond training into something approaching artistry. This was what her father had been developing before his death. This was what Project Thunderbolt had been created to achieve. The ability to place firepower exactly where it was needed, regardless of how close the friendlies might be. The GAU-8 cannon roared to life, its distinctive sound echoing through the valley as Megan placed a precisely calculated burst into the cave entrance. The explosion that followed confirmed a direct hit on the SAM launcher's ammunition supply. But more importantly, the radio call that came next confirmed that no friendly forces had been hit. Thunderbolt 7, that is a confirmed kill on the SAM site. No friendly casualties. I don't know how you made that shot, but you just saved a dozen of my men. Megan felt a surge of vindication mixed with determined focus. She had just done what the rulebook said was impossible, but the mission was far from over. There were still enemy positions preventing the SEALs from reaching safety, and she still had ammunition to eliminate those threats. For the next 17 minutes, Megan executed a series of attack runs that systematically dismantled the enemy defensive network. Each strike precisely calculated, each approach carefully planned to minimize her exposure to enemy fire while maximizing the effectiveness of her weapons. She was operating beyond the limits of conventional doctrine, beyond the boundaries of what her training had prepared her for, guided only by her instincts and the knowledge that 381 lives depended on her performance. Thunderbolt 7, this is Trident Actual. The extraction corridor is secure. We are moving all personnel toward the LZ. Your fire support has been... There are no words, pilot. Whoever you are, you just wrote the book on close air support. Megan allowed herself a small smile. Just doing my job, Trident. I will maintain overhead cover until you are clear. As she banked for another patrol circuit, a new voice came over her radio. It was Major Reynolds, and his tone had changed from angry condemnation to something approaching respectful caution. Thunderbolt 7, this is Kandahar Base Actual. Status report. Megan considered ignoring the call but decided against it. The die was already cast. Whatever consequences awaited her, she would face them directly. Kandahar Actual, this is Thunderbolt 7. SEAL Team 7 and all supporting elements are proceeding to extraction point. Enemy forces have been suppressed or eliminated along the exit corridor. I am providing overhead cover until extraction is complete. There was a long pause before Reynolds responded. Understood, Thunderbolt 7. Be advised, we are coordinating extraction helicopter support. Added to your position 10 minutes. Maintain your current operations until relieved. It was not forgiveness or approval, but it was acknowledgement that the mission she had undertaken unauthorized was now officially sanctioned, at least until the SEALs were safe. Copy that, Kandahar Actual. Thunderbolt 7 maintaining position. For the next 15 minutes, Megan continued to patrol above the moving column of Special Operations Forces as they made their way toward the extraction point. Occasionally, she would spot enemy movement and execute precision strikes to eliminate threats before they could engage the Americans below. Each attack reinforced what she had proven with her first impossible shot. The A-10 in the hands of a pilot who truly understood its capabilities could perform close air support missions that no other aircraft could match. As the first extraction helicopters appeared on the horizon, Megan allowed herself to think about what would happen next. Court-martial seemed likely, discharge from the Air Force almost certain, possibly even criminal charges for stealing an aircraft and violating direct orders. But as she watched the first group of SEALs board the helicopters that would carry them to safety, she knew that whatever price she paid would be worth it. 381 American warriors would go home to their families because she had refused to accept that they were expendable, because she had dared to do what everyone said could not be done. The last extraction helicopter lifted off 43 minutes after Megan had arrived over the valley. As it disappeared over the ridgeline, she keyed her radio one final time. Trident Actual, this is Thunderbolt 7. Confirm all personnel extracted. Thunderbolt 7, this is Trident Actual. All personnel accounted for and extracted. Total casualties, 14 wounded, 0 KIA. I don't know who you are or what happens to you after this, but every man who made it out of that valley today owes you their life. Megan felt a lump form in her throat. Just doing what needed to be done, Trident. Safe travels home. She turned her aircraft back toward Kandahar, where she knew a reception committee would be waiting. Whatever happened next, she had proven what her father had believed all those years ago, that sometimes saving lives required breaking rules, that the impossible was only impossible until someone refused to accept the limitations others had established. As she flew toward whatever consequences awaited her, Megan Riley felt a profound sense of peace. For the first time in her career, she had not just been the pilot she had trained to become. She had been the pilot her father had always believed she could be. The one who would rewrite the rules of what was possible when American lives hung in the balance. The landing at Kandahar Air Base 43 minutes later was unlike any Megan had ever experienced. As Aircraft 297 touched down on the runway, she could see crowds of personnel lining the taxiways. Not the disciplinary committee she had expected, but hundreds of airmen, soldiers, and support staff who had been monitoring her unauthorized mission through radio communications and satellite feeds. The applause began before she had even shut down her engines. It started with a few maintenance crew members and spread through the gathered crowd like wildfire, building into the kind of sustained ovation that military personnel reserve for acts of extraordinary heroism. Megan sat in her cockpit for a moment, overwhelmed by the realization that her career-ending act of insubordination had somehow transformed into something entirely different. She completed her shutdown procedures methodically despite the tumult outside, ensuring that the aircraft that had performed so faithfully was properly secured. Major Reynolds was waiting at the bottom of her aircraft's ladder, his expression unreadable in the afternoon sunlight. Behind him stood Colonel Hayes, Captain Cooper, and what appeared to be half the base's senior staff. Megan had expected immediate arrest, possibly court-martial proceedings. What she found instead was a commanding officer struggling to reconcile military discipline with undeniable results. She climbed down the ladder and stood at attention before Reynolds, her flight helmet tucked under her arm, her face streaked with sweat from the intensity of the mission. Whatever happened next, she would face it with the same determination she had shown in the valley. Captain Riley, Reynolds began, his voice carrying across the tarmac with the kind of formal authority that suggested official proceedings. You departed this base without authorization, conducted combat operations in violation of direct orders, and engaged enemy forces at ranges that exceeded all established safety protocols. Megan stood at attention, her gaze fixed forward. Yes, sir, I accept full responsibility for my unauthorized actions. Your unauthorized actions, Reynolds continued, and Megan prepared herself for the formal charges that would end her career, resulted in the successful extraction of 381 American Special Operations personnel who would otherwise have been killed or captured by enemy forces. SEAL Team 7 reports 0 friendly casualties during the extraction operation. A murmur ran through the assembled crowd. This was not the disciplinary speech they had expected either. Reynolds studied her face for a long moment, then did something that shocked everyone present. He saluted her. Captain Riley, in my 22 years of military service, I have never witnessed flying like what you demonstrated today. The precision of your strikes, the tactical awareness you displayed and your absolute commitment to the mission represent the highest traditions of the United States Air Force. Megan returned the salute crisply, her mind struggling to process this unexpected turn of events. Thank you, sir. I was just doing what needed to be done. What needed to be done, Colonel Hayes interjected, stepping forward, was still a clear violation of at least 17 regulations and direct orders. Her tone was stern, but lacked the righteous indignation Megan had anticipated. Under normal circumstances, such actions would result in immediate court-martial proceedings. The crowd grew silent, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Hayes looked at Reynolds, then back at Megan. However, these are not normal circumstances. The Joint Special Operations Command has personally contacted the base commander to express their, let's call it, gratitude for your intervention. It seems that among the personnel you rescued were 3 intelligence assets, whose loss would have constituted a significant strategic setback. Megan remained at attention, uncertain how to respond. She had not acted to save intelligence assets or for strategic considerations. She had acted because 381 American warriors were about to die, and she knew she could save them. Furthermore, Hayes continued, JSOC has expressed particular interest in the close air support techniques you employed. Techniques that, according to their observers, exceeded the capabilities documented in any current tactical manual. Captain Cooper stepped forward, a tablet in his hand. The gun camera footage from your aircraft shows you placing 30mm rounds within 25 meters of friendly forces without a single instance of collateral damage. According to current doctrine, that should be impossible. Not impossible, sir, Megan replied, just undocumented. A ghost of a smile crossed Reynolds' face. That's one way to put it. He glanced at Hayes, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Captain Riley, while your actions today constituted a clear breach of military discipline, they also demonstrated exceptional skill, judgment, and courage under fire. The kind of skill, judgment, and courage that the Air Force cannot afford to lose. Megan felt her pulse quicken. This was not going where she had expected. Therefore, Reynolds continued, instead of court-martial proceedings, you are being temporarily assigned to a special evaluation unit at Edwards Air Force Base. Your mission will be to document, analyze, and formalize the close air support techniques you employed today. Hayes took over. In other words, Captain, you are being tasked with rewriting the book on close air support operations. To turn what you did today from an unauthorized deviation into standard doctrine for future pilots. The realization of what they were offering hit Megan like a physical force. Not punishment, but validation. Not the end of her career, but the chance to transform it into something that would save countless lives in the future. To complete the work her father had begun all those years ago. Thank you, ma'am. Sir, I accept the assignment. Reynolds nodded, his expression softening slightly. Report to my office at 0800 tomorrow for detailed briefing. Until then, you're on liberty. He paused, then added in a lower voice, get some rest, Riley. You've earned it. As the official reception broke up, Megan found herself surrounded by pilots and ground crew, all eager to congratulate her or ask questions about her mission. The same people who had dismissed her for months were now looking at her with newfound respect. It was disorienting, almost surreal after so long being the outsider. She spotted Colonel Harrison standing at the edge of the crowd, a quiet smile on his weathered face. Making her way through the well-wishers, she approached him, not quite sure what to say. He had risked his career to help her, had believed in her when no one else would. Colonel, she began, but Harrison shook his head. Not here, he said softly. Too many ears. Walk with me. They moved away from the crowd toward a quiet corner of the flight line where maintenance vehicles were parked. Only when they were well away from others did Harrison speak. You did it, he said simply, just like your father would have. I could not have done it without your help, Megan replied. The Project Thunderbolt files the security system update. Harrison raised an eyebrow. I have no idea what you're talking about, Captain. I was simply performing routine system maintenance as scheduled. Megan smiled, understanding his caution. Of course, sir. My mistake. What matters, Harrison continued, is that 381 Americans are coming home because you refused to accept limitations that should never have existed in the first place. He looked out across the tarmac, his gaze distant. James would be proud of you. Do you think they're serious about implementing the techniques? Megan asked. Or is this special assignment just a way to keep me quiet until they can figure out how to bury it all again? Harrison considered this for a moment. Reynolds is a by-the-book officer, but he's not a fool. He saw what you accomplished today. More importantly, he saw the reaction of those SEALs when you saved them. That kind of operational advantage doesn't come along every day. And Colonel Hayes is from the Inspector General's office. Her job is maintaining discipline and adherence to regulations. Harrison smiled slightly, but even she knows that regulations sometimes need to evolve. What you've given them is a chance to incorporate your father's work into official doctrine without admitting they were wrong to reject it in the first place. Megan nodded, understanding the politics at play. The military could embrace her techniques while still maintaining the fiction that they had always been open to such innovations. It wasn't perfect justice for her father's legacy, but it was better than nothing. I should find Captain Martinez, Megan said. I owe her an explanation. Harrison nodded. She was worried about you, more than she let on. He touched her shoulder briefly. You did good today, Riley. Not just the flying, but the choice. Sometimes the hardest part of serving isn't following orders, it's knowing when not to. Megan found Martinez in the officer's mess, sitting alone at a corner table. The other woman looked up as Megan approached, her expression a complex mixture of relief, admiration, and lingering concern. May I join you? Megan asked. Martinez gestured to the empty chair across from her. I figured you would be tied up with debriefs and disciplinary hearings until midnight. Apparently, saving 381 special operators buys you a reprieve until morning. Megan sat down suddenly, aware of how exhausted she was now that the adrenaline was wearing off. I wanted to apologize for putting you in a difficult position. I know you tried to warn me. Martinez studied her for a long moment. I warned you because I thought you were making a career-ending mistake. Turns out you were making history instead. She shook her head with a rueful smile. Guess I was the one who had it wrong. You were looking out for me. I appreciate that. You know what the strangest part is? Martinez leaned forward, lowering her voice. My husband was with that SEAL support group. He was one of the 381. Megan felt a jolt of surprise. I had no idea. Neither did I until after you took off. Base communications patched through a personnel list from the Valley, and there he was. Martinez's eyes glistened with unshed tears. So while Reynolds was trying to order you back to base, I was sitting there praying you would keep going. The revelation hit Megan hard. She had known intellectually that she was saving fellow soldiers, but the personal connection made it suddenly viscerally real. These weren't just numbers on a tactical display. They were husbands, fathers, sons, people with lives and loved ones waiting for them to come home. He called me right after extraction, Martinez continued. Said he watched your A-10 dance between missile fire like nothing he had ever seen. Said every man in that valley knew they were going to die until Thunderbolt 7 showed up. Megan felt her throat tighten with emotion. I was just doing what I was trained to do. No, Martinez said firmly. You were doing what no one else was trained to do, what no one else could do. She reached across the table and grasped Megan's hand briefly. Thank you for not listening to me. Thank you for saving him. 6 months later, Captain Megan Riley stood in the same briefing room where she had once been relegated to equipment inventory duties. But everything had changed. The patch on her shoulder now read, Close Air Support Development Program. And when she spoke, rooms full of experienced pilots listened with the kind of attention reserved for genuine experts. The key to precision close air support is understanding that technology serves technique, not the other way around, she told the assembled group of pilots from multiple services. The A-10's targeting systems are excellent, but they're only as effective as the pilot's ability to read terrain, assess friendly positions, and maintain situational awareness under extreme stress. The audience included some of the same officers who had once dismissed her suggestions as inappropriate ambition. Now they took notes on her presentations and requested individual instruction on the targeting techniques she had developed. The Korangal Valley mission had transformed her from an outsider to the Air Force's leading expert on extreme close air support operations. After the briefing, Major Reynolds, recently promoted to lieutenant colonel, approached her with the kind of smile that suggested new opportunities were on the horizon. Captain, we've received requests from 3 different commands for your expertise. It seems that saving 381 lives has a way of changing how people view your qualifications. Megan looked around the briefing room at the faces of pilots who had once seen her as too small, too analytical, too inexperienced to matter when lives were on the line. Now they saw her as someone who had proven that conventional limitations existed only until someone was willing to exceed them. The young captain, who had been deemed unfit for real combat missions, had become the instructor, teaching others how to accomplish the impossible. "There's something else," Reynolds said, handing her a folder stamped with security classifications. "The Air Force has officially declassified Project Thunderbolt. Your father's work is finally getting the recognition it deserves." Megan opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was the complete documentation of her father's research, along with a formal acknowledgement of its contribution to modern close air support doctrine. More importantly, there was an amendment to his service record, removing the citation for deviation from standard operating procedures and replacing it with a posthumous commendation for exceptional initiative in developing advanced combat techniques. "This was Colonel Harrison's doing, wasn't it?" she asked. Reynolds nodded. "He submitted the request for reevaluation immediately after your mission. Pushed it through every level of bureaucracy until it landed on the Secretary of the Air Force's desk." He paused. "Harrison also recommended you for something else." From his pocket, Reynolds produced a small velvet box. Opening it revealed the silver oak leaf insignia of a major. "Effective immediately," Reynolds said. "The youngest major in the squadron's history, I might add." Megan stared at the insignia, overcome with emotion. Not just for the promotion, but for everything it represented. The validation of her father's work. The acknowledgement that sometimes the rules needed to be broken for the greater good. The understanding that true courage meant doing what was right even when it wasn't authorized. "There's one more thing," Reynolds said, his tone growing more serious. "The Air Force is establishing a new Special Operations Air Support Unit specifically trained in the techniques you've developed. They want you to command it." "Command it?" Megan echoed in disbelief. 20 A-10s and 40 pilots, all dedicated to the kind of close air support missions that conventional doctrine said were impossible. Reynolds smiled. "They're calling it Thunderbolt Squadron in honor of your father's project. And there's no one more qualified to lead it than you." As Megan processed the magnitude of what she was being offered, she caught sight of a familiar figure standing in the doorway of the briefing room. Colonel Frank Harrison, now retired, but still a frequent visitor to the base, gave her a small nod of approval. The man who had believed in her from the beginning, who had recognized in her the same spirit that had driven her father. The man who had given her the chance to prove that the impossible was just another word for something that hadn't been attempted by the right person yet. Colonel Frank Harrison, age 65, paused in his narrative and looked out at the young pilots assembled in the Edwards Air Force Base auditorium. Their faces reflected the same mixture of awe and inspiration he had hoped to instill. The story of Thunderbolt 7 and the rescue that had changed Air Force doctrine forever had become legend in military circles, but hearing it from someone who had witnessed it firsthand brought a different level of impact. And that, ladies and gentlemen, he concluded, is how one pilot rewrote the book on close air support, by refusing to accept that 381 Americans were expendable, by having the courage to risk everything for what she knew was right. A young lieutenant in the front row raised her hand. "Sir, what happened to Major Riley after that?" Harrison smiled. "That's Brigadier General Riley now. She commands the Joint Close Air Support Training Center at Davis-Monthan. Still flies the A-10 regularly, still pushes the boundaries of what people think is possible." He looked around the room, making eye contact with each pilot in turn. "But the most important legacy isn't her rank or her command. It's that because of what she did that day, hundreds of American service members have come home from combat zones that once would have been considered impossible to support." He closed his presentation folder and straightened to his full height, the old soldier in him still evident despite the years. "The regulations exist for a reason. Discipline and chain of command are the backbone of our military. But there comes a moment in every officer's career when you have to choose between what is in the rulebook and what's right. When that moment comes, I hope you'll remember Thunderbolt 7 and the impossible rescue that wasn't impossible after all." As the audience rose to applaud, Harrison's mind traveled back to that day 17 years earlier, to the young captain with fire in her eyes, who had refused to accept that 381 Americans were going to die because the rulebook said they couldn't be saved. To the moment when he had chosen to help her knowing it might end his career, but unable to stand by and watch good people die when there was a chance, however slim, of saving them. It had been worth it, every risk, every consequence, every moment of doubt. Because sometimes the most important battles weren't fought against enemy forces, but against limitations that existed only in the minds of those who refused to see beyond them. And in the end, that was what the story of Thunderbolt 7 was really about. Not just a daring rescue or a display of exceptional flying skill, but the courage to challenge the impossible. To look at what everyone else said couldn't be done and say, "Watch me." As the young pilots filed out of the auditorium, Harrison knew that some of them would face their own Korengal Valley someday. Their own moment when the rulebook said one thing and their conscience said another. When that day came, he hoped they would remember what one determined pilot had proven on a desperate afternoon in 2005. That the word impossible was just another challenge waiting for someone brave enough to accept it.